The story of Rome begins not with certainty, but with myth and legend intertwined with fragments of historical truth. According to Roman tradition, twin brothers Romulus and Remus were born to a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia and the god Mars. Fearing these divine children, a jealous king ordered them drowned in the Tiber. The river, perhaps knowing their destiny, carried them gently downstream, where they washed ashore at the future site of Rome. There, a she-wolf discovered the abandoned infants, nurturing them with her milk until a shepherd named Faustulus found and raised them as his own. As they grew into strong young men, they learned of their royal heritage and decided to establish a new settlement on the banks where they had been saved. But the brothers quarreled. In a moment that would echo through Roman history, Romulus killed Remus and became the sole founder of the new city. Standing atop what would later be called the Palatine Hill, Romulus marked the boundaries of Rome with a plough in the year we now call 753 before the Common Era, a date that Romans would later measure their history from. The early settlement was little more than a collection of thatched huts overlooking the Tiber, surrounded by stronger Etruscan cities to the north and Greek colonies to the south. To strengthen his nascent community, Romulus offered asylum to outlaws, exiles, and refugees from surrounding areas. This created a problem, a shortage of women, which Romulus solved through the famous episode known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, inviting the neighboring Sabines to a festival and then abducting their daughters as brides for Roman men. For nearly 2.5 centuries after Romulus, Rome was ruled by kings. 7 monarchs in total guided the early city's development, transforming it from a village into a significant regional power. After Romulus came Numa Pompilius, remembered as a wise and pious ruler who established many of Rome's religious traditions and institutions. He created the position of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, and established the Temple of Janus, whose doors would be closed only in times of peace, a rare occurrence in Roman history. The third king, Tullus Hostilius, expanded Roman territory through warfare against neighboring Alba Longa. Under his rule, Rome absorbed the Alban population after their defeat, establishing a pattern of assimilation that would serve Rome well throughout its history. The famous combat between the Heraci and Curiati triplets, representing Rome and Alba Longa respectively, dates from this period, a symbolic battle that decided the fate of both cities without full-scale war. Ancus Marcius, the fourth king, constructed Rome's first bridge across the Tiber and founded the port city of Ostia at the river's mouth, opening trade routes that would eventually connect Rome to the Mediterranean world. He also expanded the city's boundaries to include the Janiculum Hill, providing better defense for the growing settlement. With the fifth king, Tarquinius Priscus, Etruscan influence became prominent in Roman culture. He initiated the construction of the Great Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and the Circus Maximus for chariot races. The massive drainage project of the Cloaca Maxima began under his rule, transforming the swampy valley between the hills into what would eventually become the Roman Forum. Servius Tullius, the sixth king, implemented Rome's first constitution, dividing citizens into classes based on wealth and military capability. This organization, known as the Centuriate Assembly, would remain fundamental to Roman military and political life for centuries. Servius also constructed the first defensive wall around the entire city, encompassing the famous 7 hills of Rome: the Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian. The final king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, ruled as a tyrant. His reign saw impressive building projects, including the completion of the Temple of Jupiter. But his arrogance and cruelty alienated the Roman nobility. The breaking point came when his son Sextus Tarquinius raped Lucretia, a virtuous Roman noblewoman. This outrage provoked a rebellion led by Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucretia's husband Collatinus. In 509, the monarchy was overthrown. Tarquin and his family fled into exile, and the Roman Republic was born. This new system of government, designed to prevent the concentration of power in any single individual, would shape not only Rome's future, but influence political thought for millennia to come. Looking back at this foundational period, we can see how Rome's early experiences shaped its character. From its beginnings, Rome displayed remarkable adaptability, absorbing influences from Etruscans and Greeks while developing its own distinct identity. The early Romans established traditions of military discipline, practical engineering, and legal organization that would serve as foundations for their later empire. The city that began as a small cluster of villages grew to include multiple settlements across the 7 hills, connected by paths that would become the famous streets of Rome. By the end of the monarchy, the population had swelled to perhaps 35,000 people, making it one of the larger cities in central Italy, though still modest compared to what it would become. Roman society in this early period was organized around the family, with the paterfamilias, male head of household, wielding nearly absolute authority over his dependents. Religious observance was meticulous, with Romans believing that proper rituals maintained the Pax Deorum, peace with the gods, essential for the city's prosperity. As you drift deeper towards sleep, envision these early Romans, farmers and warriors, priests and craftsmen, laying the groundwork for what would become the eternal city. From simple beginnings on the Tiber's banks, Rome would eventually stretch its influence across 3 continents and establish an empire unlike any the world had seen before. But that expansion was still to come. For now, as the kings departed from history, Rome stood at the threshold of its Republican era, ready to embark on the path to greatness that would make its name immortal. As the last king of Rome fled into exile, the people stood at the dawn of a new era. The monarchy that had guided the city's early growth was gone, replaced by a bold experiment in governance that would shape the destiny of Rome for the next 5 centuries. The newly established republic was designed to prevent the concentration of power that had led to tyranny under Tarquinius Superbus. 2 annually elected magistrates called consuls replaced the king, each able to veto the other's decisions. This system ensured that no single person could dominate Roman politics. Behind these consuls stood the Senate, a council of elders drawn from noble families, whose advice carried enormous weight, though it lacked formal legislative power. The early republic faced immediate threats to its existence. The exiled king sought allies among neighboring cities, while the powerful Etruscan lord Lars Porsena besieged Rome. According to legend, a Roman hero named Horatius Cocles held a bridge against the Etruscan army single-handedly, while his comrades destroyed it behind him, saving the city from capture. Rome's internal politics proved as challenging as its external enemies. The Republic was initially dominated by patricians, hereditary nobles who controlled both political and religious institutions. The majority of citizens, known as plebeians, found themselves excluded from power and often trapped in debt bondage to patrician landowners. This tension between the orders would shape Roman politics for centuries. The first major social crisis came when plebeian soldiers, the backbone of Rome's military might, withdrew from the city to the Sacred Mount in history's first recorded general strike. This drastic action forced patricians to create the office of tribune of the plebs, magistrates who could veto legislation harmful to plebeian interests. Tribunes were declared sacrosanct. Anyone who harmed them faced religious condemnation and death. The next significant development came with the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code. Posted in the Forum for all to see, these laws brought transparency to what had been secretive legal procedures controlled by patricians. Though still favoring the elite in many respects, the 12 Tables represented a crucial step toward greater equality under the law and established the principle that laws should be public knowledge. As Rome resolved these internal challenges, it gradually expanded its influence throughout central Italy. The city fought numerous wars against neighboring peoples, the Volsci, Aequi, Sabines, and most significantly, the Etruscans. The conquest of the wealthy Etruscan city of Veii, just 12 miles to the north, doubled the territory under Roman control. This expansion faced a devastating setback when Celtic Gauls defeated the Roman army at the Allia River and proceeded to sack Rome itself. Most of the city was destroyed, though defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. According to legend, sacred geese in the temple of Juno warned Romans of a night attack, saving the citadel. The Gauls eventually withdrew after receiving a ransom of gold, but the traumatic memory of this disaster would remain in Roman consciousness for centuries. Remarkably, Rome rebounded swiftly from this catastrophe. The city was rebuilt and stronger walls constructed. Within decades, Rome had defeated the Latin League, incorporating these related peoples into its growing state. Some Latin communities received full Roman citizenship, others partial rights, establishing patterns of graduated citizenship that would become a hallmark of Roman statecraft. The middle years of the Republic saw significant political reforms. The Licinian Sextian laws required that one consul must be a plebeian, opening the highest office to non-patricians. Over subsequent decades, plebeians gained access to all major magistracies and religious offices. While wealth rather than birth increasingly determined political opportunity, this process of social integration helped Rome avoid the destructive class conflicts that plagued many Greek city-states. Rome's growing power inevitably brought conflict with other regional powers. Through 3 grueling wars against the mountain peoples of central Italy, known as Samnites, Rome extended its control from coast to coast across the Italian peninsula. As Rome consolidated its position in central and southern Italy, it encountered the sophisticated Greek cities of Magna Graecia. The most powerful of these, Tarentum, felt threatened by Roman expansion and called for help from Pyrrhus, king of Epirus in Greece. Pyrrhus arrived in Italy with a formidable force, including war elephants previously unknown to Romans. Despite winning several battles against Roman armies, Pyrrhus suffered such heavy casualties that these Pyrrhic victories depleted his forces. After an unsuccessful campaign in Sicily, Pyrrhus returned to Greece, leaving the Greek cities to face Rome alone. Soon after, Tarentum fell, and Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula south of the Po River. Rome's governance of this new Italian confederacy showed remarkable wisdom. While maintaining firm control of foreign policy and military affairs, Rome allowed allies to retain local autonomy. The extension of various grades of citizenship and legal rights created incentives for loyalty. Roman colonies placed throughout the peninsula served dual purposes, rewarding veterans with land while establishing strategic military posts. This Italian alliance system would provide Rome with manpower resources that far outstripped any rival in the Mediterranean world, a decisive advantage in the conflicts to come. United Italy represented a geopolitical revolution in the ancient world, a large territorial state with centralized leadership, but flexible enough to accommodate local diversity. Rome's attention soon turned beyond Italy to Sicily, where Carthage, a powerful maritime empire centered in North Africa, controlled the western portion of the island. When a group of Italian mercenaries called Mamertines requested Roman protection against the Syracusans and Carthaginians in Sicily, Rome faced a momentous choice. Intervention would mean war with Carthage, a naval power with centuries of maritime experience that Rome lacked. The Senate's decision to accept the Mamertines' appeal triggered the First Punic War. This conflict forced Rome to develop naval capabilities from scratch. After early defeats, Romans captured a Carthaginian ship and used it as a template to build their own fleet. They equipped these vessels with a corvus, a boarding bridge, that allowed Roman soldiers to use their superior infantry skills in naval combat. Despite catastrophic losses to storms and battle, Roman persistence eventually prevailed. Carthage ceded Sicily to Rome, paying a substantial indemnity. The Second Punic War brought Rome closer to destruction than any conflict since the Gallic sack. The brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca led an army, complete with war elephants, from Spain across the Alps into Italy. He inflicted 3 catastrophic defeats on Roman armies at the Trebia River, Lake Trasimene, and most devastatingly at Cannae, where perhaps 50,000 Romans perished in a single day. Despite these disasters, Rome refused to surrender. While Hannibal marched through Italy, gaining allies among disaffected Roman subjects, Rome raised new armies. The general Quintus Fabius Maximus adopted delaying tactics, avoiding direct confrontation, while a young commander named Scipio took the war to Spain and then Africa. Faced with a threat to Carthage itself, Hannibal was recalled from Italy. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio, now called Africanus, defeated Hannibal, ending the war. Carthage surrendered its navy, its overseas territories, and its political independence, becoming a Roman tributary state. Victory over Carthage established Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Roman attention turned eastward to the Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged from Alexander the Great's empire. The Roman legions defeated King Philip V of Macedonia and subsequently overcame the Seleucid king Antiochus III at Thermopylae and Magnesia. The ancient kingdom of Macedonia was divided into 4 republics under Roman supervision. Greece itself came under direct Roman rule. The same year, a Third Punic War ended with the complete destruction of Carthage. These conquests transformed Roman society profoundly. Enormous wealth flowed into Italy from the new provinces, enriching the state treasury and private individuals. Slaves captured in war became abundant, changing the nature of Italian agriculture as small farms gave way to large estates worked by slave labor. Many displaced rural citizens migrated to Rome, creating social tensions in the crowded capital. The republican political system, designed for a small city-state, struggled to administer a vast Mediterranean empire. Governors sent to rule provinces often exploited their positions for personal gain. Successful generals commanded the loyalty of their troops, creating potential threats to civilian authority. The traditional values of simplicity, duty, and self-sacrifice that Romans called mos maiorum, the way of the elders, seemed to wane as luxury and ambition increased. These changes set the stage for the tumultuous final century of the Republic. Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune and proposed redistributing public land to address rural poverty. His legislation provoked fierce opposition from wealthy senators who eventually murdered him, the first political assassination in Rome for centuries. A decade later, his brother Gaius Gracchus met a similar fate after proposing more radical reforms, including grain subsidies for urban citizens. These events shattered the traditional consensus of the ruling elite and established political violence as a tool in Roman politics. In the decades that followed, ambitious generals like Marius and Sulla used their military power to intervene in political disputes. Sulla's march on Rome marked the first time a Roman general turned his army against the city itself. After defeating his rivals in a bloody civil war, Sulla had himself appointed dictator and conducted systematic purges of his enemies through proscription lists, public postings naming those to be killed, and their property confiscated. Though Sulla eventually retired, his actions created a dangerous precedent. Three powerful men, Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar, formed an unofficial coalition known as the First Triumvirate to dominate Roman politics. Caesar secured command in Gaul, where his brilliant campaigns conquered modern France and briefly invaded Britain, earning him unprecedented wealth, military experience, and popularity. When the alliance fractured, the Senate aligned with Pompey against Caesar. Ordered to surrender his command, Caesar instead crossed the Rubicon River with his army, igniting civil war with the famous declaration, "The die is cast." After defeating Pompey's forces, Caesar became dictator of Rome, implementing numerous reforms, including a new calendar. His increasing honors and lifetime dictatorship alarmed Republicans who saw him as aspiring to monarchy. On the Ides of March, conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated Caesar in the Senate House. Rather than restoring the Republic, Caesar's murder triggered renewed civil war. His adopted son, Octavian, joined with Mark Antony and Lepidus in the Second Triumvirate to hunt down Caesar's killers. After defeating Brutus and Cassius at Philippi, the triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Inevitable tensions emerged, particularly between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east, where he allied himself with Egypt's queen Cleopatra VII. The final showdown came at Actium, where Octavian's forces under Agrippa defeated the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where they later committed suicide. Octavian, now sole ruler of Rome's vast territories, carefully avoided Caesar's mistakes. While accumulating unprecedented personal power, he maintained republican facades, referring to himself as princeps, first citizen, rather than king or dictator. The Senate awarded him the title Augustus, marking the effective end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The Republic's legacy was complex. Its constitutional balance had ultimately failed to prevent civil war and dictatorship. Yet during its 5 centuries, Rome had evolved from a small Italian city-state to master of the Mediterranean world. Republican institutions would continue in name under the emperors, and republican ideals of liberty, civic duty, and constitutional government would echo through Western political thought for millennia to come. As Octavian stood before the Senate in January of the year we now mark as 27 before the Common Era, Rome stood at a crossroads. The republic that had governed for 5 centuries lay in ruins after decades of civil war. Yet rather than claiming outright monarchy, Octavian performed a careful political dance. He announced the restoration of power to the Senate and people of Rome, seemingly relinquishing the extraordinary authority he had accumulated. The Senate, filled with his supporters, responded by granting him the name Augustus, a title with religious overtones suggesting one who is revered or sacred. they also awarded him a carefully assembled package of powers: command of key provinces where legions were stationed, tribunician authority, giving him veto power, and numerous other privileges. This moment marked the birth of what historians call the Principate, a system where Augustus ruled as first citizen rather than king, maintaining the facade of republican government while wielding unprecedented personal power. Augustus would rule for 41 years, establishing patterns that would define Roman imperial governance for centuries. He reduced the army from 60 legions to 28, settling veterans in colonies throughout Italy and the provinces. He reformed the tax system, established a postal service, created firefighting cohorts, and organized a permanent police force in Rome. His building projects transformed the capital, so much so that he famously boasted of finding Rome a city of brick and leaving it a city of marble. In foreign affairs, Augustus secured and expanded Roman frontiers. Germanic tribes were pushed back beyond the Rhine, while the empire's boundary in the east was secured through diplomacy with the Parthian Empire. Spain was finally fully conquered after centuries of resistance, and the Danube became Rome's northern frontier in Europe. Perhaps most crucially, Augustus created a stable system of succession, something that had eluded the Republic in its final decades. Having no son, he gradually elevated his stepson Tiberius to prominence, ensuring a smooth transfer of power upon his death. Tiberius, a capable general but reluctant ruler, began a dynasty known as the Julio-Claudians that would govern Rome for more than 50 years. His rule started well, but grew increasingly dark after he withdrew to the island of Capri, leaving affairs of state to the ambitious Praetorian prefect Sejanus. After uncovering Sejanus's plot to seize power, Tiberius launched a wave of treason trials that spread fear through the Roman aristocracy. Tiberius was succeeded by his grandnephew Caligula, whose early promise devolved into apparent madness. Stories of his excesses, cruelty, and bizarre behavior, including plans to make his horse a consul, may be exaggerated, but his assassination after just 4 years of rule speaks to his unpopularity among the Roman elite. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's household troops, then elevated Claudius to the throne. Despite physical disabilities that had led his family to sideline him, Claudius proved an able administrator. During his 13-year reign, he expanded the empire, conquering Britain and incorporating new provinces in the east. He also extended citizenship more widely and admitted Gauls to the Senate, recognizing that Rome's future lay in provincial integration rather than Italian domination. The Julio-Claudian dynasty ended with Nero, who began his reign promisingly under the guidance of the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. As he asserted his independence, however, his rule grew tyrannical. He had his mother, Agrippina, murdered, kicked his pregnant wife to death, and persecuted Christians after the Great Fire of Rome. Rising unpopularity led to revolts, and Nero committed suicide, reportedly lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." Nero's death ushered in chaos known as the Year of 4 Emperors. In quick succession, the generals Galba, Otho, and Vitellius claimed the throne, each overthrown by military revolt. Finally, Vespasian, commanding the Eastern legions, emerged victorious, establishing the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian brought stability back to the empire during his 10-year reign. A man of humble origins with a practical approach to governance, he restored fiscal responsibility after Nero's extravagance. His greatest architectural legacy was beginning construction of the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known today as the Colosseum, built on the site of Nero's opulent palace as a gift to the Roman people. His eldest son, Titus, succeeded him, just months before Mount Vesuvius erupted, destroying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Titus handled this and other disasters, including a fire in Rome, with such compassion that he was widely mourned when he died after just 2 years of rule. The final Flavian emperor was Domitian, whose 15-year reign witnessed significant military activity along the Danube frontier and in Britain. While an effective administrator, his autocratic tendencies alienated the Senate. His assassination brought the Flavian dynasty to an end. The Senate then selected one of its own members, the elderly Nerva, as emperor. With no natural heir and limited military support, Nerva adopted the popular general Trajan as his successor, establishing a pattern of adoptive succession that would serve Rome brilliantly for nearly a century. Trajan, born in Spain, became the first emperor from outside Italy. His 19-year reign saw the Roman Empire reach its greatest territorial extent. He conquered Dacia, roughly modern Romania, incorporating its gold mines into the empire. His most ambitious campaign annexed Armenia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Parthia, briefly extending Roman rule to the Persian Gulf. Though some of these eastern conquests would be abandoned by his successor, they represented the high watermark of Roman expansion. Beyond military glory, Trajan was celebrated for his domestic policies. His extensive building programs included a massive forum in Rome and projects throughout the provinces. He established the Alimenta, a welfare program providing support for poor children in Italy, and was generally regarded even by later Romans as the optimal emperor against whom others were measured. On his deathbed, Trajan may have adopted his relative Hadrian, though some suspected the adoption was fabricated by Hadrian's supporters. Regardless, Hadrian became emperor and immediately shifted imperial policy. Recognizing that the empire had reached its practical limits, he withdrew from Trajan's eastern conquests and focused on consolidation rather than expansion. Hadrian spent more than half his 21-year reign traveling throughout the provinces, often walking on foot with his troops while inspecting frontier defenses. In Britain, he ordered the construction of a massive wall spanning the island's narrow northern waist, creating a barrier against tribal incursions that stands partially intact today. Similar frontier works were strengthened throughout the empire, establishing clear boundaries in place of continued expansion. A lover of Greek culture who wore a beard in the Hellenic fashion, unlike his clean-shaven predecessors, Hadrian spent extensive time in Athens, completing the massive temple of Olympian Zeus begun centuries earlier. His architectural legacy in Rome included the Pantheon, with its revolutionary concrete dome, still standing today as testament to Roman engineering brilliance. Hadrian's chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, ruled for 23 remarkably peaceful years. His reign saw no major wars or internal disturbances, allowing the empire to prosper. Continuing the tradition of adoption, Antoninus selected Marcus Aurelius as his heir, with the provision that Marcus in turn adopt Lucius Verus as co-emperor. Marcus Aurelius, a devoted Stoic philosopher whose meditations remain widely read today, found his reign dominated by military challenges despite his philosophical nature. Germanic tribes, possibly pushed westward by population movements deeper in Europe and Asia, began pressing against Roman frontiers on the Danube in greater numbers than before. While Marcus and Lucius initially ruled jointly, Lucius' death left Marcus in sole command during increasingly difficult times. Beyond external threats, the empire faced a devastating pandemic known as the Antonine Plague, possibly smallpox, brought back by troops from campaigns in the east. This disease killed perhaps 5 million people throughout Roman territories, weakening both military and economic strength at a critical juncture. Despite these challenges, Marcus Aurelius maintained the frontiers and even planned to create new provinces beyond the Danube before his death. Unlike his predecessors, who chose the most qualified successor through adoption, Marcus allowed his biological son, Commodus, to succeed him, a decision that would have dire consequences for Rome. Looking back across this 2-century span from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, this era represents the Roman Empire at its zenith. The population reached perhaps 70 million people, living in relative security under the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. A vast network of roads, totaling over 250,000 miles, facilitated trade, communication, and military movement throughout the Mediterranean basin and beyond. Cities flourished with public amenities unknown in earlier ages, aqueducts delivering fresh water, public baths, theatres, and forums. Roman law, increasingly sophisticated and humane, was administered across 3 continents. Literature and art thrived during this period as well. Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses, the histories of Tacitus, the biographies of Suetonius, and the letters of Pliny the Younger all date from this era. While innovations in science lagged behind literary achievements, practical knowledge in fields like architecture, engineering, agriculture, and medicine made daily life for Romans more comfortable than for any large population before them. Perhaps most significantly, this period saw the birth and early spread of Christianity. Jesus of Nazareth lived and died during the reign of Tiberius, and the new religion slowly spread throughout the empire despite sporadic persecution. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, Christian communities existed in most major cities, laying foundations for developments that would transform the later empire. The early empire also witnessed the increasing importance of the provinces. Italy lost its privileged position as emperors from Spain, and beyond assumed the purple. Citizenship was gradually extended more widely, culminating generations later in its grant to all free inhabitants of the empire. Trade networks connected distant regions, with goods flowing from as far as India and China into Roman markets. This remarkable era of stability and prosperity rested on several pillars. The Augustan settlement that balanced imperial power with respect for tradition. The adoption system that produced a series of capable rulers. Frontiers secure enough to prevent major invasions. And an economy that, despite its limitations by modern standards, generated sufficient surplus to maintain urban civilization and a standing army of nearly 400,000 men. As Marcus Aurelius drew his final breath on the Danubian frontier, none could foresee that this golden age was ending. The accession of Commodus would mark the beginning of troubles that would test the resilience of the imperial system in ways its creators never imagined. Yet the achievements of the early empire would echo through the centuries, creating an ideal of peace, prosperity, and good governance that would inspire civilizations long after Rome itself had fallen. The golden age of the Roman Empire began to dim as Commodus assumed the purple following the death of Marcus Aurelius. Unlike his philosophical father, Commodus had little interest in the burdens of governance. Handsome and athletic, he preferred the gladiatorial arena to the council chamber. He often fought in staged combats, charging the imperial treasury enormous sums for his appearances, and boasting of thousands of victories against opponents who dared not defeat him. While Commodus indulged his fantasies, renaming Rome Colonia Commodiana and styling himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, the machinery of empire continued functioning through the efforts of experienced administrators. Yet his capricious executions of senators and officials created a climate of fear. On the final day of the year, he was strangled in his bath by his wrestling partner Narcissus, part of a plot involving his inner circle, who feared they would be next to face his wrath. After Commodus's assassination, the venerable General Pertinax was elevated to the throne by the Senate. His attempts to restore discipline among the Praetorian Guard proved fatal. They murdered him after just 3 months, when he refused their demands for a special bonus. What followed was perhaps the most shameful episode in Roman history. The Praetorians literally auctioned the empire to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator, won this dubious honor, but his reign lasted only 66 days. Provincial armies, disgusted by events in Rome, put forward their own commanders as imperial candidates. From this chaos emerged Septimius Severus, commander of the Pannonian legions, who marched on Rome, disbanded the disgraced Praetorians, and established a new dynasty. Severus was a capable soldier who secured his position through a combination of military victories and ruthless elimination of rivals. Born in Leptis Magna in North Africa, he was the first emperor from that continent and spoke Latin with an accent. His reign brought significant changes to Roman governance, particularly the increasing militarization of the administration and greater reliance on equestrians rather than senators for key positions. During his 18-year rule, Severus conducted successful campaigns in the east against the Parthian Empire, creating the new province of Mesopotamia with its rich farmlands. He also traveled to Britain to strengthen Hadrian's Wall and campaign against the Caledonians in Scotland. It was there, in the northern outpost of Eboracum, modern York, that he died, reportedly advising his sons to enrich the soldiers and scorn everyone else. Those sons, Caracalla and Geta, were intended to rule jointly, but their hatred for each other made cooperation impossible. Within a year, Caracalla had his brother murdered in their mother's arms and ordered a damnatio memoriae, erasing Geta from official records and monuments. Caracalla then embarked on a reign of terror against his brother's supporters. Despite his cruelty, Caracalla issued one of the most significant edicts in Roman history, the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to all free men within the empire. While partially motivated by a desire to increase tax revenue, this decree formalized the evolution of Rome from city-state to universal empire, where citizenship was defined by law rather than ethnic origin. Caracalla was assassinated while campaigning in the east, stabbed to death by a soldier as he relieved himself along a road. The Severan dynasty continued through a series of rulers connected by the remarkable women of the family, particularly Julia Maesa, sister-in-law of Septimius Severus, who engineered the rise of her grandsons Elagabalus and later Alexander Severus. Elagabalus scandalized Rome with his religious devotion to the Eastern Sun, god whose name he bore, attempting to make this cult supreme over traditional Roman worship. His alleged effeminacy, including reports that he married a male charioteer, further alienated traditional Romans. After 4 years, the Praetorians murdered him and threw his body into the Tiber. Alexander Severus, just 13 when he ascended the throne, ruled under the regency of his mother Julia Mamaea. His 13-year reign attempted to restore good relations with the Senate and traditional values, but military challenges were mounting. A new Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, had replaced the Parthians and posed a greater threat in the east. Meanwhile, Germanic tribes increased pressure on the Rhine and Danube frontiers. When Alexander negotiated with Germanic tribes rather than fighting them, his troops mutinied and proclaimed Maximinus Thrax, a giant former shepherd from Thrace, as emperor. Maximinus represented a new type of emperor, a soldier of humble origins with little education or refinement, who rose through military merit alone. Though an effective general, His harsh taxation to fund military campaigns made him deeply unpopular with civilians. The Senate, desperate to restore their influence, supported a revolt led by the elderly governor Gordian and his son in Africa. When they were quickly defeated, the Senate appointed two of their own members, Pupienus and Balbinus, as co-emperors. Maximinus marched on Italy, but was murdered by his own troops as they besieged Aquileia. The Senate's appointees were themselves soon killed by the Praetorian Guard, who elevated the 13-year-old Gordian III, grandson of the earlier claimant. This dizzying sequence of emperors and usurpers inaugurated what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Over the next few decades, at least 26 men claimed the imperial title, most ruling for just a few years before meeting violent ends. The Roman world seemed to be unraveling as the imperial office became the prize in an endless, destructive military lottery. External threats compounded the internal chaos. The Emperor Decius and his son died fighting Goths at the Battle of Abritus, the first Roman emperor to fall in battle against foreign enemies. The Emperor Valerian suffered an even worse fate, captured alive by the Sassanid Persian king Shapur I, and allegedly used as a human footstool before being skinned after death and stuffed as a trophy. With central authority collapsing, the empire began to fragment. In the west, a Gallic empire encompassing Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain broke away under a succession of local rulers. In the east, the desert trading city of Palmyra under Queen Zenobia established control over provinces from Egypt to Asia Minor. Economic crisis accompanied political disintegration as the currency was repeatedly debased to pay the armies, triggering severe inflation. It seemed Rome's 1,000-year story might be approaching its end. Yet even in this darkest hour, resilient structures and capable individuals emerged to pull the empire back from the brink. The turning point came with the accession of Claudius II Gothicus. In his brief 2-year reign, he defeated Gothic invaders in the Balkans so decisively that he earned the title Gothicus. Though he died of plague, his work was continued by Aurelian, acclaimed by his troops following Claudius's death. Aurelian's 5-year reign earned him the title Restorer of the World. He defeated the Palmyrene Empire, bringing Queen Zenobia to Rome in golden chains for his triumph. He then recovered the breakaway Gallic provinces, reunifying the empire. To protect Rome itself from barbarian raids, he built a massive new wall circuit that still stands partially intact today. He reformed the currency and established an official sun cult that attempted to provide religious unity. Aurelian's assassination, based on a secretary's false claim that the emperor planned to execute several officers, threatened to unravel his achievements. Several short-lived emperors followed before Carus established a brief dynasty. While campaigning successfully against Persia, Carus allegedly died when his tent was struck by lightning, though assassination remains possible. His son Numerian was murdered by his Praetorian prefect Aper while returning from the Persian campaign. At Numerian's funeral, the assembled officers acclaimed Diocletian, a cavalry commander of humble Dalmatian origin, as emperor. Diocletian immediately executed Aper personally, fulfilling a prophecy that he would become emperor after killing the boar. Aper in Latin. With Diocletian's accession, the crisis period finally ended. Though the empire had survived, it was profoundly transformed. The old Augustan Principate, with its careful balance of republican forms and imperial power, was gone. In its place stood a more overtly autocratic system, where the emperor was increasingly seen as a remote, sacred figure rather than first among equals. Military needs now dominated all aspects of governance. The army had nearly doubled in size to face multiple frontier threats, consuming an ever larger share of the state's resources. Taxation had grown heavier and more systematic to support these forces. The distinction between Italy and the provinces had largely vanished as the entire empire shouldered similar burdens. Yet despite the trauma of the 3rd century crisis, important cultural developments continued. This period saw the rise of Neoplatonism through philosophers like Plotinus, whose mystical vision of reality would deeply influence later Christian thought. Christianity itself spread widely during these troubled decades, offering spiritual solace and community in uncertain times. The religion that had once been a persecuted minority was becoming a major force in Roman society. Roman law continued to evolve, with jurists like Ulpian and Papinian refining legal concepts that would influence civilizations far beyond Rome's eventual fall. Despite economic difficulties, Roman engineering still produced remarkable works, from Aurelian's walls to public buildings throughout the provinces. As the 3rd century closed, the empire that Diocletian inherited was wounded but not defeated. The coming reforms would reshape Rome's government completely, creating a new imperial system capable of meeting the challenges of a changing world. The transition from the early empire of Augustus to the late Roman world was complete, a transformation forged in the crucible of crisis and recovery. As Diocletian stood victorious after claiming the purple, the Roman world lay exhausted from a half-century of crisis. Drawing lessons from this turmoil, the new emperor would reshape imperial governance more dramatically than anyone since Augustus. Born to a humble family in Dalmatia, on the Adriatic coast, Diocletian had risen through military service without the benefit of aristocratic connections. This outsider's perspective perhaps allowed him to see more clearly the systemic problems facing Rome. The empire had grown too vast and complex for a single ruler to manage effectively. Military emergencies on one frontier often required the emperor's presence just as crises erupted elsewhere. Recognizing this reality, Diocletian took the unprecedented step of appointing a co-emperor. He elevated his fellow officer Maximian to the rank of Augustus, assigning him responsibility for the western provinces, while Diocletian focused on the east. This division proved insufficient, so Diocletian expanded the imperial college further by appointing 2 junior emperors called Caesars, Galerius in the east and Constantius Chlorus in the west. This system, known as the Tetrarchy or Rule of 4, divided administrative responsibilities while maintaining the fiction of a unified empire. Each tetrarch governed a quarter of Roman territory from his own capital city, as Rome itself lost its central role. The arrangement included a plan for orderly succession. After 20 years, the senior Augusti would retire, allowing the Caesars to be promoted and select new junior colleagues. This mechanism aimed to prevent the succession crises that had plagued the 3rd century. Beyond restructuring imperial leadership, Diocletian reorganized the empire's administrative geography. Provinces were subdivided into smaller units, nearly doubling their number, but making them more manageable. These provinces were grouped into 12 dioceses, themselves organized into 4 prefectures, corresponding to each tetrarch's territory. This arrangement created multiple layers of oversight intended to reduce corruption and improve efficiency. The military underwent similar reorganization. Diocletian separated civil and military authority, which had traditionally been combined in provincial governors. He substantially increased the size of the army to address multiple frontier threats simultaneously. To limit the power of potentially rebellious generals, he reduced the size of provincial armies, while creating a central mobile reserve that could respond to crises. These expanded military and administrative structures required greater resources. Diocletian implemented a comprehensive census to identify taxable wealth and individuals. His new tax system required payment in kind, rather than increasingly worthless currency, with set quotas of produce and goods collected from each region. To ensure essential services continued, Diocletian mandated hereditary occupations for certain vital professions, binding sons to follow their fathers' trades. While these reforms stabilized the empire, they came at the cost of significantly increased state control over individual lives. The free market economy of the early empire gave way to a more regulated system where the state's needs took precedence over private initiative. The distinction between honestiores and humiliores, higher and lower classes, became more pronounced, with different legal standards applied to each. Diocletian also attempted to address economic instability through his edict on maximum prices, which set price ceilings for thousands of goods and services throughout the empire. Though well-intentioned, this measure proved impossible to enforce and was ultimately abandoned. In religious matters, Diocletian initially showed tolerance, but later launched what became known as the Great Persecution against Christians. This final and most severe attempt to suppress Christianity included the destruction of churches, confiscation of scripture, and execution of clergy. Despite its intensity, the persecution varied by region and failed to halt Christianity's spread. True to his succession plan, Diocletian took the unprecedented step of voluntarily retiring, compelling his co-Augustus Maximian to do the same. He spent his remaining years cultivating cabbages at his palace in Split on the Dalmatian coast, reportedly telling visitors that only someone who had been emperor could understand the pleasures of retirement. The carefully designed tetrarchic system collapsed almost immediately after its creator's retirement. The succession plans were undermined by dynastic sentiment, as troops proclaimed Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, and Maxentius, son of Maximian, as emperors. The following years saw complex power struggles as various claimants fought for supremacy. Constantine emerged victorious from these conflicts. According to Christian tradition, before the crucial battle of the Milvian Bridge against Maxentius, Constantine saw a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether motivated by genuine conversion or political calculation, Constantine's embrace of Christianity would transform the Roman world. The Edict of Milan, issued jointly with his eastern colleague Licinius, formally ended the persecution of Christians and restored their confiscated property. Though not making Christianity the official state religion, the edict granted it legal status and imperial favor. Constantine later defeated Licinius to become sole ruler of a reunited empire. Perhaps Constantine's most consequential decision was founding a new capital on the site of the Greek city Byzantium. Dedicated as Constantinople, it occupied an unparalleled strategic position, controlling the strait between Europe and Asia. This new Christian city, free from Rome's pagan associations, would serve as the imperial capital for over 1,000 years. Constantine maintained many of Diocletian's administrative reforms while softening their harsher aspects. He created a new gold currency, the solidus, which maintained its value for centuries, bringing monetary stability after decades of inflation. His religious policies favored Christians without directly suppressing traditional worship, beginning a gradual transition that would accelerate under his successors. After Constantine's death, the empire passed to his 3 surviving sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans. Their reigns were marked by fratricidal conflict and continuing religious tensions, particularly surrounding the Arian controversy about Christ's divine nature. Constantius II emerged as sole emperor, ruling until his death. The brief reign of Julian the Apostate, Constantine's nephew, marked the last serious attempt to restore traditional Roman religion. Raised as a Christian, but secretly converting to paganism, Julian sought to revitalize classical culture and reduce Christian privileges during his 18-month rule. His death fighting the Persians ended this religious counter-revolution. The emperors who followed Julian maintained Christianity's favored position. Under Theodosius I, Christianity became the official state religion. The Edict of Thessalonica established Nicene Christianity as the empire's sole legitimate faith, while subsequent edicts closed pagan temples and prohibited traditional sacrifices. The millennium-old religious traditions that had sustained Rome since its founding were now officially abandoned. Theodosius faced significant external challenges beyond religious matters. His predecessor Valens had suffered a catastrophic defeat at Adrianople against Gothic forces, with perhaps 2/3 of the eastern field, army destroyed, and Valens himself killed. This battle demonstrated the growing military threat posed by Germanic peoples seeking land within the empire. Rather than attempting to expel these Goths, Theodosius settled them within imperial territory as foederati, allied troops serving under their own leaders while acknowledging Roman sovereignty. This pragmatic solution provided needed manpower, but increased the influence of semi-autonomous Germanic groups within Roman borders. The late Roman military relied increasingly on such allied contingents and recruited heavily among Germanic peoples for regular units as well. The stereotype of effete Romans hiring barbarians to fight their battles is oversimplified. Many Romans still served, and many barbarians were thoroughly Romanized. Nevertheless, the army's ethnic composition changed significantly from earlier centuries. Social and economic developments during this period reflected the empire's transformation. Christianity reshaped cultural values, emphasizing otherworldly salvation over classical civic virtues. The urban middle classes declined as imperial service and large agricultural estates dominated economic life. Cities shrank within defensive walls as their classical monuments were cannibalized for building material or converted to Christian use. Yet amid these changes, remarkable cultural achievements continued. This era saw the flowering of patristic literature as Christian thinkers like Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine developed sophisticated theological and philosophical systems that would influence Western thought for centuries. In law, the Theodosian Code compiled imperial legislation, creating a systematic legal reference that preserved Roman jurisprudence for future generations. Upon Theodosius's death, the empire was divided between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Though theoretically temporary, this division would prove permanent. While the eastern and western courts maintained the fiction of a unified empire, they increasingly pursued separate interests and faced different challenges. The eastern half, wealthier and better protected geographically, would endure for another 1,000 years, as what modern historians call the Byzantine Empire, though its citizens continued to call themselves Romans. The western half faced existential challenges that would lead to its collapse within a single lifetime. As the 4th century closed, the transformed Roman state bore little resemblance to the Principate of Augustus. The emperor now ruled as an Oriental-style monarch, addressed as Dominus rather than Princeps. Officials bowed before the imperial presence, which was increasingly secluded behind elaborate court ceremonial. Christianity had displaced traditional religion, altering fundamental assumptions about society and human purpose. Yet for all these changes, the essential continuity of Roman governance remained. The empire still controlled roughly the same territories as under the Antonines. Latin and Greek remained the languages of administration. Roman law still regulated daily life. Citizens still identified as Romans, even as what that identity meant evolved with changing circumstances. The stage was now set for the final act of the Western Empire's long drama. As Germanic pressure on the frontiers increased and internal resources dwindled, the Western emperors would face challenges that would ultimately prove insurmountable. The coming century would witness the end of direct Roman rule in the West, even as the eastern half adapted and survived. As the 5th century dawned, the Roman world stood divided between the sons of Theodosius. While technically ruling a single empire, Arcadius in Constantinople and Honorius in Milan presided over increasingly separate realms. Both young emperors relied heavily on powerful advisors, Rufinus in the east and Stilicho in the west. The resulting court intrigues would weaken imperial authority at precisely the moment when Rome faced its greatest external challenge. The catalyst for the coming crisis was the arrival of the Huns from the Eurasian steppes. Their westward migration pushed Germanic peoples against and ultimately across the Roman frontiers in unprecedented numbers. The most immediate threat came from the Goths, who, after the death of their leader Fritigern, united under an ambitious new king named Alaric. Alaric's Goths settled within the empire as federati since their victory at Adrianople, felt mistreated by imperial authorities. When their demands for better terms were rebuffed, they revolted and began moving through the Balkans, alternately negotiating with and threatening both Eastern and Western imperial courts. Stilicho, himself of partial Vandal ancestry, but thoroughly Roman in culture and loyalty, handled the Gothic threat with a combination of military action and diplomacy. However, his efforts were undermined by suspicion from both imperial courts, each fearing he sought to control the entire empire. After Stilicho's execution on charges of treason, the Western Empire lost its most capable defender. With Stilicho gone, Alaric saw opportunity. He invaded Italy and accomplished what had not happened in 8 centuries, the sack of Rome itself. Though the Goths remained in the city only 3 days and the damage was relatively contained, the psychological impact on the Roman world was immense. Jerome, writing in Bethlehem, lamented that the bright light of all the world was put out, and the whole world perished in one city. After Alaric's death, shortly after the sack, the Goths moved into Gaul and eventually settled in Aquitaine as Roman federates. Meanwhile, other Germanic peoples had crossed the frozen Rhine during a particularly harsh winter, pouring into Gaul and eventually Spain. These included Vandals, Sueves, and Alans, who established their own territories within nominally Roman provinces. The Western imperial government, now based in Ravenna, for better security than Rome, struggled to respond to these multiple incursions. Increasingly, real power rested with the master of soldiers, the supreme military commander, rather than the emperor himself. For nearly 2 decades, that position was held by Flavius Aetius, sometimes called the last of the Romans. While Aetius worked to maintain what remained of Roman authority in Gaul, a new threat emerged in North Africa. The Vandals under their king, Gaiseric, crossed from Spain to Africa, conquering the wealthy provinces that had long supplied Rome with grain. By seizing Carthage, they established a powerful kingdom and built a fleet that would dominate the Western Mediterranean. As these settlements of Germanic peoples within the empire were unfolding, the Western Empire faced its most fearsome opponent, Attila the Hun. Having already ravaged the eastern provinces and defeated imperial armies, Attila turned westward, invading Gaul. Aetius cobbled together a coalition of Roman forces and Germanic federates, including Visigoths, that confronted the Hunnic army at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. This desperate defense halted Attila's advance in Gaul. The following year, Attila invaded Italy. Rome seemed doomed until an embassy led by Pope Leo I somehow persuaded the Hun to withdraw. While later accounts would attribute this to divine intervention, practical factors likely included disease in Attila's army, food shortages in ravaged Italy, and possibly bribes from Constantinople. Attila's death shortly after this campaign and the subsequent collapse of Hunnic power gave Rome a brief respite. That same year, however, court intrigue led to the murder of Aetius on the orders of Emperor Valentinian III. The emperor himself was assassinated by Aetius's supporters months later, ending the Theodosian dynasty in the West. What followed was a rapid succession of short-lived emperors, many mere puppets of powerful military commanders. Majorian, who ruled for just a few years, represented the last serious attempt to restore Roman power in the West. His efforts to rebuild the military and recover North Africa from the Vandals ended with his defeat and execution. After Majorian, Western emperors controlled little beyond Italy itself, with various Germanic kingdoms establishing effective independence in former provinces. In Spain, the Sueves controlled the northwest, while Visigoths expanded their territory from Aquitaine. In Gaul, Burgundians ruled the southeast, while Franks gradually increased their power in the north. Britain, abandoned by imperial forces decades earlier, had developed its own post-Roman society increasingly influenced by Saxon settlers. By the later decades of the 5th century, the Western emperors had become irrelevant to most of the former provinces. Real power in Italy rested with the military commander Ricimer and, after his death, with his successors Gundobad and finally Orestes. Orestes installed his young son Romulus as emperor, though the boy exercised no actual authority. Germanic troops in Italy, mainly from the Scyrian and Herulian tribes, demanded permanent land grants similar to those given to federates in other provinces. When Orestes refused, they rallied behind Odoacer, a German officer in Roman service. Odoacer overthrew Orestes and deposed Romulus, ending the charade of imperial rule in the West. In a pragmatic solution, Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, signaling that a separate Western emperor was unnecessary. He requested and received the title of patrician, governing Italy nominally as Zeno's viceroy, but effectively as an independent king. Romulus, still a teenager, was permitted to retire to a country estate with a generous pension, an unexpectedly merciful end for a deposed ruler. This moment is traditionally marked as the fall of Rome, or more accurately, the end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet for people living through these events, there was no dramatic collapse. Many of the structures of Roman life continued under new management. Germanic kings issued laws based on Roman models, maintained some form of tax system, and often employed Roman administrators. Several factors contributed to the Western Empire's failure to withstand the pressures that its Eastern counterparts successfully navigated. The West faced more exposed land frontiers and more frequent invasions. Its economy had been less urbanized and more agrarian than the East's, even in better times. The wealthy provinces of North Africa and parts of Gaul that had sustained Western finances were lost to Vandals and Visigoths, creating a spiral of declining resources. Western emperors also suffered from a deficit of legitimacy compared to their Eastern colleagues. The constant civil wars and rapid turnover of rulers undermined confidence in imperial authority. After the sack of Rome, the psychological foundation of empire, the belief in Rome's eternal destiny, was severely damaged in the West. Yet even as direct imperial rule faded, Romanitas, Roman culture and identity, endured. Latin remained the language of administration and literacy. The Catholic Church preserved Roman organizational structures and legal concepts. Aqueducts still carried water, and people still gathered in forums, even as new Germanic lords ruled from former imperial palaces. The end of the Western Empire did not mean the end of the Roman world. In the East, the empire continued to flourish from its magnificent capital at Constantinople. The Emperor Zeno and his successors considered themselves the legitimate rulers of the entire Roman world, including the lost western provinces that they hoped to someday recover. In Italy itself, Odoacer's rule would prove brief. Emperor Zeno authorized Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths, to invade Italy and depose Odoacer. After defeating and eventually murdering his rival, Theodoric established a kingdom that represented one of the most successful syntheses of Roman and Germanic elements in the post-imperial West. As the Western provinces began their gradual transformation into what would eventually become medieval Europe, the idea of Rome retained its powerful grip on the imagination. Germanic kings sought recognition from Constantinople and coveted Roman titles. The church increasingly filled the administrative vacancy left by imperial retreat. And far to the east, the Roman Empire, now Greek-speaking and Christian, but still calling itself Roman, continued to uphold the legacy of Augustus and Constantine. The end of the Western Roman Empire thus marks not a cataclysmic collapse, but a significant transition point in a much longer process of transformation. The political structure created by Augustus 5 centuries earlier had finally failed in the West, but Roman civilization, like a great river dividing around an obstacle, would continue flowing through new channels in the medieval world to come. While the Western Roman Empire faded into history, its Eastern counterpart continued to thrive. The citizens of this surviving realm never called themselves Byzantines, a term invented by modern historians. They proudly identified as Romans, Romaioi, in their increasingly Greek speech, the rightful inheritors of Caesar and Constantine. For nearly a millennium after the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, this Eastern Roman Empire would preserve and transform the legacy of Rome. As the 5th century closed, Emperor Zeno faced significant challenges. Religious controversies over the nature of Christ divided Eastern Christians, while Isaurian countrymen from Zeno's mountainous homeland dominated the court, breeding resentment among Constantinople's population. Yet the empire remained intact, with efficient tax collection, professional administration, and military security that the fragmented West could only envy. Zeno's successor, Anastasius, provided 27 years of capable governance. His careful financial stewardship replenished the treasury, while his construction of the long walls protected Constantinople's landward approaches. Though religious tensions continued during his reign, Anastasius maintained the empire's position against Sassanid Persia, its traditional rival in the east. The golden age of the Eastern Roman Empire arrived with the accession of Justinian I. Born to Latin-speaking peasants in the Balkan provinces, Justinian married the remarkable Theodora, whose journey from actress of questionable reputation to imperial consort scandalized conservative circles, but brought a shrewd and determined partner to the throne. Justinian's ambition was nothing less than the restoration of imperial unity. he dispatched his brilliant general Belisarius to recover North Africa from the Vandals. Belisarius accomplished this mission with remarkable speed and efficiency, returning the wealthy grain-producing region to imperial control. Emboldened by this success, Justinian authorized the invasion of Ostrogothic Italy. The Italian campaign proved far more difficult. What was planned as a swift reconquest became a 20-year struggle that devastated the peninsula. Though imperial forces eventually prevailed, capturing Ravenna and defeating the last Gothic resistance, the cost was enormous. Italy, once the heart of Roman power, lay economically ruined. Parts of Spain were also recovered, but Justinian's dream of full Western restoration remained elusive. These military campaigns stretched imperial resources already strained by war with Persia. The situation worsened when bubonic plague reached Constantinople, killing perhaps 40% of the city's inhabitants and spreading throughout the Mediterranean basin. This demographic catastrophe reduced tax revenues and military recruitment, creating fiscal problems that would plague Justinian's successors. Despite these challenges, Justinian's reign witnessed remarkable achievements. The magnificent church of Hagia Sophia, with its revolutionary dome spanning 108 feet, remains one of the world's architectural marvels. Even more enduring was the Corpus Juris Civilis, a comprehensive compilation and reform of Roman law that preserved classical legal principles for future generations. This legal code would eventually form the basis of many European legal systems and represents one of Rome's most significant legacies to the modern world. After Justinian's death, the empire entered a difficult period. His successor, Justin II, lost much of Italy to the Lombards, while warfare with Persia drained resources. Subsequent emperors, Tiberius II and Maurice, maintained imperial defenses, but struggled with diminishing resources. Maurice's attempts to reform the military led to his overthrow and execution by the usurper Phocas. The 7th century brought unprecedented challenges to the empire. Under Shah Khosrow II, Persia launched massive invasions, capturing Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. Jerusalem fell, and the true cross, most sacred of Christian relics, was carried to the Persian capital as a trophy. Persian forces reached the Bosporus opposite Constantinople itself. In this moment of supreme crisis emerged one of Rome's greatest emperors. Heraclius, who had overthrown the tyrant Phocas, personally led the imperial counterattack. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he drove deep into Persian territory, forcing a peace that restored all lost provinces and the true cross. This stunning reversal appeared to secure Rome's eastern frontier permanently. Yet even as Heraclius celebrated his triumph, a new power was emerging in the Arabian desert. United by the prophet Muhammad and inspired by the new faith of Islam, Arab armies erupted into Roman and Persian territories with astonishing speed. The exhausted Persian Empire collapsed entirely, while Roman forces suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk. Within a decade, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, provinces that had been Roman for over 6 centuries, fell under Islamic rule. This catastrophic loss of territory transformed the empire. The remaining realm became more compact, centered on Constantinople, Western Asia Minor, and the southern Balkans. Greek definitively replaced Latin as the language of administration, while the empire took on a more explicitly Christian character. Modern historians often mark this 7th century transformation as the transition from the Eastern Roman to the Byzantine Empire, though contemporaries saw no such division. Despite these massive territorial losses, the empire adapted and survived. The theme system, reorganizing provinces into military districts where soldier farmers defended their own lands, proved an effective response to constant Arab raids. Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn even on water, gave imperial fleets a crucial advantage in defending Constantinople. When Arab forces besieged Constantinople itself on two separate occasions, the formidable defences held firm. The failure of these sieges marked a turning point, preserving the empire as a Christian bulwark in the eastern Mediterranean and saving much of Europe from Islamic conquest. The 8th and early 9th centuries brought controversies over religious imagery, known as the iconoclastic period. Emperors from Leo III to Theophilus banned veneration of icons, viewing them as dangerously close to idol worship. This policy divided society and strained relations with Rome and other Western Christians who continued to use sacred images. The restoration of icons healed these divisions and ushered in a period of cultural and intellectual revival. Under the Macedonian dynasty, founded by Basil I, the empire regained its strength. Agricultural production increased, cities revived, and military fortunes improved. Emperors like Nikephoros Phocas and John Zimisces recaptured territories in Syria, while Basil Sen earned the sobriquet Bulgar Slayer for his ruthless campaigns that brought all the Balkans under imperial rule. This resurgent Rome, albeit Greek in language and culture, represented the most powerful, wealthy, and sophisticated society in the Christian world. Constantinople, with perhaps 500,000 inhabitants, dwarfed the modest towns of Western Europe. Its markets featured goods from as far as China and Scandinavia. Its churches gleamed with mosaics, and its scholars preserved ancient texts unknown in the West. Yet beneath this golden facade, structural weaknesses were developing. The free peasantry that had formed the backbone of the theme armies gradually lost land to expanding aristocratic estates. Civil service positions increasingly became hereditary rather than merit-based. Religious differences with the Latin West widened, culminating in the schism that divided Christianity into Catholic and Orthodox branches. The pivotal disaster came at Manzikert, where Seljuk Turks defeated Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes and opened Anatolia, the empire's heartland, to Turkish settlement. Simultaneously, Normans conquered the last imperial possessions in Italy, and Pechenegs raided across the Danube. The empire that had seemed triumphant just decades earlier now fought for survival. The desperate appeal for Western aid by Emperor Alexios I Komnenos helped trigger the First Crusade. While Crusaders did establish states in the Holy Land, tensions between Latins and Greeks grew increasingly bitter. The Fourth Crusade infamously diverted to Constantinople itself, sacking the greatest Christian city in the world and establishing a short-lived Latin empire on its ruins. Though imperial forces recaptured Constantinople under Michael VIII Palaiologos, the restored empire was but a shadow of its former self. Italian merchant republics dominated its economy, while Serbian and Bulgarian states carved away Balkan territories. Most importantly, Turkish emirates controlled most of Anatolia, with the aggressive Ottoman state emerging as the greatest threat. The Ottoman Turks crossed into Europe, gradually encircling Constantinople. Despite desperate diplomatic efforts to secure Western aid, support proved minimal. Emperor Constantine XI faced the massive Ottoman army of Sultan Mehmed II with only a few thousand defenders when the final siege began in April. For 7 weeks, the ancient walls of Constantinople withstood Ottoman cannon fire. On May 29th, the final assault broke through. Constantine XI allegedly threw off his imperial regalia and died fighting alongside his soldiers as the city fell. Mehmed rode to Hagia Sophia, which became a mosque that same day. The Roman Empire, which had endured for 1,480 years since the accession of Augustus, finally ended. Yet its legacy lived on in many forms. The Ottoman sultans styled themselves as Caesars of Rome, ruling much of the former Byzantine territory. Moscow claimed the mantle of the Third Rome, preserving Orthodox Christianity and imperial traditions. Renaissance Italy rediscovered classical texts preserved by Byzantine scholars who fled west before and after Constantinople's fall. Most significantly, the Byzantine Empire had served as the crucial bridge between ancient and medieval worlds. It preserved Roman law, Greek philosophy, and early Christian theology through centuries when these might otherwise have been lost. Its elaborate diplomacy, sophisticated bureaucracy, and complex economy provided models far beyond its borders. The epic story that began with Romulus on the Palatine Hill had finally concluded. But Rome never truly fell. It transformed. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the echoes of Roman civilization continuing through the laws we follow, the languages we speak, the buildings we admire, and countless other aspects of our world that would be unrecognizable without the enduring legacy of Rome. Though the last emperor, bearing the title of Caesar, fell with Constantinople in 1453, Rome's influence echoes through the centuries to our present day. As you drift closer to sleep, let us reflect on the enduring legacy of this remarkable civilization that shaped our world in countless ways. Perhaps Rome's most significant contribution lies in the realm of law and governance. The Romans developed a sophisticated legal system that moved beyond the limited scope of earlier codes to address the complex needs of a diverse cosmopolitan society. Concepts we take for granted, the presumption of innocence, the importance of intent in criminal acts, the distinction between civil and criminal law all bear Roman fingerprints. Justinian's great legal compilation, the Corpus Juris Civilis, preserved these principles through the medieval period and into the modern era. When European nations developed their legal systems in the late medieval and early modern periods, they drew heavily on this Roman inheritance. Today, the civil law tradition that governs most of continental Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa and Asia derives directly from Roman models. Even the common law tradition of England and its former colonies, while developing separately, absorbed many Roman concepts. Beyond specific legal provisions, Rome pioneered practices of public administration that would influence later states. The Romans created a professional civil service, systematic record-keeping, standardized weights and measures, regular censuses, and sophisticated tax systems. While these innovations might seem mundane, they formed the essential infrastructure that allowed complex societies to function. The very idea of citizenship, a formal legal status conferring rights and responsibilities, owes much to Roman practice. Rome's gradual extension of citizenship to conquered peoples offered a path to integration that helped sustain the empire for centuries. This model of earned inclusion, though imperfectly implemented, provided an alternative to the strict ethnic exclusivity that characterized many ancient states. In the realm of language and literature, Rome's impact remains inescapable. Latin, the speech of rustic farmers on the Tiber's banks, became the lingua franca of Western civilization for over a millennium. Though no longer spoken as a first language, Latin's descendants, the Romance languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian, are native tongues for nearly 1 billion people today. Even languages not directly descended from Latin bear its influence through centuries of borrowing. English, though Germanic, in its basic structure, derives roughly 60% of its vocabulary from Latin, either directly or through French. Scientific, legal, and technical terminology throughout the world remains predominantly Latin-based, providing a common vocabulary across linguistic boundaries. Roman literature established forms and themes that would resonate through Western literary tradition. Virgil's epic Aeneid became a touchstone for later poets from Dante to Milton. Ovid's inventive mythological narratives in the Metamorphoses influenced Shakespeare and countless other writers. Cicero's rhetoric provided models for political oratory, while Seneca's philosophical works and tragedies shaped Renaissance drama. The letters of Pliny and the histories of Tacitus continued to influence how we understand the purpose and methods of these genres. The physical legacy of Rome remains equally impressive. Roman engineering transformed the Mediterranean landscape with an infrastructure network of unprecedented scale. Many Roman roads still form the basis of modern highways, their carefully planned routes proving optimal even with today's technology. Aqueducts built by Roman engineers continued to supply water to cities like Segovia in Spain into the 20th century. Roman architectural innovations, particularly their refinement of the arch, vault, and dome, made possible buildings of scale and permanence previously unimaginable. Their development of concrete allowed for structures that have endured 2 millennia of earthquakes, floods, and warfare. The Pantheon in Rome, with its perfect dome featuring an oculus open to the sky, remains one of the world's architectural marvels, inspiring buildings from the Renaissance to the present day. In military affairs, Rome's legacy is similarly profound. The legion, a flexible professional fighting force combining heavy infantry with specialized units, provided a model that would influence armed forces for centuries. Roman emphasis on discipline, training, engineering, and logistics, rather than mere courage or numbers, set standards that later successful armies would emulate. Military academies today still study Caesar's campaigns as exemplars of strategic and tactical brilliance. Rome's political legacy presents a more complex picture. The Republic, with its checks and balances, separation of powers, and term limits, influenced the framers of many modern constitutions, particularly America's founders. Yet Rome also demonstrated how republican institutions could be subverted by ambitious individuals, and how liberty might be traded for security and stability. The imperial system that replaced the republic similarly offered both positive and negative lessons for later generations. At its best, the Roman Empire provided good governance, security, and prosperity to diverse populations across 3 continents. At its worst, it demonstrated the dangers of autocracy, the corruption of absolute power, and the challenges of maintaining unity across vast territories and different cultures. Christianity, the world's largest religion, owes its global spread to the Roman context in which it developed. Early Christians utilized Roman roads, ships, and urban networks to disseminate their message. After Constantine's conversion, the imperial administrative framework provided a template for ecclesiastical organization, with dioceses often corresponding to Roman provincial boundaries. Even the title Pontifex Maximus, once held by Roman emperors as chief priest of the state religion, passed to the popes who lead the Catholic Church. Rome's cultural achievement lay not just in its original contributions, but in its genius for synthesis and transmission. Roman artists, philosophers, and scientists often adapted Greek models, but in doing so, they preserved and transmitted Greek achievements to later civilizations. Without Rome as intermediary, much of classical Greek thought might have been lost to the Western tradition. The idea of Rome itself became a powerful symbol long after the empire's fall. Throughout the medieval and early modern periods, political leaders sought to claim the Roman mantle. Charlemagne's coronation as Roman emperor in 800, the Byzantine ruler's identity as Romaioi, the Russian Tsars claimed to be heirs of the Third Rome, and the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire all reflect Rome's potent symbolic legacy. Even Nazi architecture and Mussolini's fascist imagery consciously evoked Roman imperial grandeur, showing the persistent, if sometimes misused, power of Roman symbolism. Perhaps most fundamentally, Rome bequeathed to later civilizations a cosmopolitan vision, the idea that diverse peoples could participate in a shared cultural and political community while maintaining aspects of their distinct identities. Though imperfectly realized in practice, this Roman ideal of a world brought together under law and common citizenship, rather than divided by ethnic or religious boundaries, remains a powerful aspiration in our own increasingly interconnected global society. Rome also demonstrated both the heights humanity can achieve and the depths to which it can sink. The same civilization that produced the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius also featured the excesses of Caligula. The society that built the Pantheon also staged the brutal gladiatorial games. This complex legacy reminds us that human achievements are always mixed with human failings, that civilization itself is always both inspiring and flawed. As you fall deeper into sleep, imagine how different our world would be without Rome's enduring influence. Our legal systems and languages, our architecture and engineering, our political institutions and religious organizations, all would be profoundly transformed without the Roman experience. From mundane details like the names of our months, to profound questions about citizenship and governance, Rome has shaped how we understand ourselves and our society. The Roman story, spanning more than 2 millennia from Romulus to the fall of Constantinople, offers a grand epic of human achievement, resilience, and adaptation. Through rises and falls, triumphs and disasters, the Roman world evolved while maintaining connections to its past. Even after the empire ceased to exist as a political entity, its shadow continued to influence everything that followed. As you drift off to sleep, take comfort in this continuity of human experience. The same stars that shone over Augustus as he transformed Rome from brick to marble now shine on us. The same human hopes, fears, and dreams that motivated Romans for security, prosperity, meaning, and beauty motivate us still. In that shared humanity lies perhaps Rome's most profound legacy of all,